My name is Parag Gad. I'm the co-founder and CEO of SpineX. The problem we're solving is one which is the most frequently seen sensory motor dysfunction in children. We're talking about cerebral palsy. The current standard of care for cerebral palsy primarily focuses on improvement of symptoms. We're beginning with physical therapy, medications, intramuscular injections of Botox to manage spasticity, or multiple irreversible surgeries. Each of these comes with an increasing risks and associated costs. More importantly, they primarily focus on management of symptoms rather than treating the underlying condition. With this motivation, Team SpineX went ahead and developed world's first non-invasive spinal neuromodulation device, SCIP. SCIP is the world's first non-invasive spinal neuromodulation device capable of delivering low-intensity electrical pulses to the spine at specific levels of the cord, allowing the brain and spinal cord to be trained to improve sensory motor function. SCIP has been recognized by the FDA as a breakthrough device based on the early positive clinical data collected by Team SpineX. Therapy is completely painless, is always delivered in conjunction with activity-based neurorehab therapy. The device is low cost and has already proven to be far more effective compared to the current standard of care. So what is spinal neuromodulation? Spinal neuromodulation is the method to deliver low-intensity electrical pulses to the spine at specific levels to activate the neural networks in the spine that control specific movements. The basic scientific principle being targeted here is that the neurons in the spine contain the circuitry responsible for control of movement. By delivering these low-intensity electrical pulses, we are activating and training the networks that are responsible for generating these movements completely voluntarily. The neuromodulation pulses are always delivered at a sub-motor threshold to change the level of excitability of these neurons, such that the brain can then voluntarily control these networks to generate the movements of choice. Therapy consists of 60-minute sessions twice a week for a period of 8 to 16 weeks. During these sessions, the child is actively engaged in activity-based neurorehab therapies of their choice to engage them in these movements. Compared to current standard of care, SCIP is completely non-invasive with its unique waveforms. It allows us to specifically target the neural networks of choice. It is low cost, and our pilot data so far has demonstrated to be far more effective compared to the current standard of care. Here are a few examples of the improvements possible within the first session. Here's a child with a level 5 CP being trained to sit upright and to improve head control and sitting posture. On the left is the attempt in the absence of active neuromodulation, and on the right is in the presence of active neuromodulation. These videos are taken about 5 minutes apart, and this is the first time that this child has been exposed to neuromodulation. And as you can see, when the stimulation is delivered, the child's control is significantly better, but not only improvement in head control and posture, it's the overall calmness of the hands, the legs, and the trunk that is visible. Similarly, when looking at a sit to stand and standing posture, here's the mom assisting in transferring from a sit to stand position. And while in a standing position, the child is able to stand for a longer period of time, but also while the stimulation is being actively delivered, the mom is able to release support from the right knee such that the child is fully weight bearing. while act stimulation is actively being delivered. Here's an example of a child with a level 4 CP attempting to take steps on the treadmill in the absence versus presence of stimulation. On the left, with in the absence of stimulation versus on the right in the presence of stimulation. And as you can see, when the stimulation is delivered at a submotor threshold, the child is actively able to take steps completely voluntarily. And you can see the stimulation is not causing any pain or discomfort, with the smile on the child's face, who is just happy being a child and walking around. These are the acute effects. While the same therapy is delivered chronically over a period of time, the neuroplasticity set in the brain and spinal cord allows the movements to be far more effective and sustained even in the absence of stimulation. Here's a child with a level 4 CP attempting to walk in a walker at home in the absence of stimulation versus the same condition after 8 weeks of skip therapy. And as you can see, the ability to take voluntary steps is significantly better after just 8 weeks or 16 therapy sessions. Similarly, a child with a level 5 CP needing 3 individuals to assist in taking steps versus after just 8 weeks of therapy being able to take steps voluntarily. Now, while we're using sitting and stepping as markers or movement examples of movement, the same principles are also applicable for all aspects of sensory-motor function, including hand and arm function, trunk function, posture, head control, etc. A couple more quick examples of potential improvements. Here's a young girl who's had a hemispherectomy surgery and classified as cerebral palsy, approximately level 1 or 2, in the presence versus absence of active neuromodulation. And as you can see, while the stimulation is actively being delivered, her steps are smoother, is able to take longer steps, is able to be more consistent, and based on feedback received from the girl, she suggests that taking steps is easier while the stimulation is actively being delivered. And another example of a child post-hemispherectomy, a young boy, approximately 3 years of age, walking on the treadmill. And as you can see, when the stimulation is actively being delivered, the steps are on his left limb are straighter. He's able to place his foot on the treadmill belt in a straighter position as compared to the sidestepping seen in the absence of stimulation. So based on these principles, a study was conducted in 16 children over a period of 8 weeks to study the effects of skip therapy and activity-based neurorehab therapy. And what we observed was that the improvement possible is greater than the current standard of care on the GMFM-88 scale. The GMFM-88 is a standardized metric for improvement in sensory motor function, and we saw an average of 13-point improvement after just 8 weeks of therapy. And this was consistently seen across different levels of CP, levels 1 through 5, as well as different ages of in children at the time of enrollment, right from about 2.5 years of age to as old as 16, demonstrating the improvement possible is not dependent on age or the severity of CP. So our vision in this case is that for a child suffering from cerebral palsy, introduction of skip with activity-based neurorehab therapy will allow them to go from a standing position to walking to potentially playing and being involved with their peers. Quickly looking at the mechanism of action, a combination of skip and activity-based neurorehab therapy works with the four following principles. It increases descending commands from the brain. It improves the coordination of muscle firing of various extremities, increases proprioceptive information that is being processed in the spinal cord, and finally it increases the level of sensory control that is possible. A combination of these four mechanisms together leads to improvement in global sensory-motor function. While SpineX has only been active for the last couple of years, this principle has been studied by Dr. Reggie Edgerton at UCLA for over 50 years. Spinal control of movement as a phenomena is one that was pioneered by Reggie and team over the last several decades, leading up to creation of our first MVP device in early 2020, eventually leading to the FDA breakthrough designation in April 2022. Based on this timeline, we anticipate conducting our first pivotal trial for FDA clearance sometime in the first or second quarter of next year, hopefully leading to the FDA clearance by the second quarter of 2024. So to summarize, here's a breakthrough technology that's meeting unmet clinical needs, has low regulatory and financial risks, and has a great opportunity for children, pediatric therapists, and parents. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions you have.
There were a lot of questions that came through beforehand when people signed up. And one question I had when you were speaking was, you mentioned that you're aiming for 2024 FDA clearance. What does that mean as far as timing coming to the market?
Well, I think the device would then be available right after that. The availability, is dependent on several other factors. I think reimbursement ends up being a completely different challenge for us, and that's a much long-term plan. So FDA clearance is the first step in that process. Once it's cleared, we then, there are additional studies that need to be done independent of the first study, which then we're able to take to the insurers and other agencies to really convince them that this is a therapy that they should be covering. So there are two separate challenges. The go-to-market challenge is a completely different beast as compared to the regulatory challenges. So I think that's a much more long-term horizon, which is a 3 to 5 year plan, I would say, after FDA clearance.
So 3 to 5 years after 2024, so 2027.
Yeah.
2029.
But then again, I think the key there is once it's FDA cleared, it's still available for use in clinic, based on a prescription, and it would still be something that therapists, physicians, clinicians can prescribe for their patients, children as needed.
I mean, it's really exciting to me, frankly, and I've said this to you before, as an adult with CP, I'm curious to see, how that could affect me, how doing some work maybe in my PT clinic could then provide some lasting effect that, perhaps I could get some treatment with it in a PT clinic and then it holds me over to my next session the next week. Can you go into a little bit, as you're comfortable, the research related to adults and or kind of the lasting effect between PT sessions for both children and adults?
Sure. So both great questions. I'll take the first one, two-part answer to that. So like I said, our work initially began with adults with neurological dysfunction, such as spinal cord injury and stroke. So we have got a fair amount of experience in that field. What we do know is that this therapy or spinal neuromodulation as such is effective in adults as well. There are different neurophysiological concepts to keep in mind between a cerebral palsy case versus a spinal cord injury case, for example. And those are differences that we are accounting for in terms of our protocol, in terms of how we deliver the therapy, etc. Having said that, adults with CP is something that we have not explored to the same extent as pediatrics just yet, but we do believe that there is potential. We just haven't done enough to know exactly what that may look like and how different it would be, and what would need to be done to make it the most effective. So that is something that we plan to address after this first indication is clear, is figuring out how or exploring the impact of spinal neuromodulation on adults with CP. Regarding the second question about the changes between sessions, I think again a two-part answer there. The improvements that we see are the most exciting ones are the ones actually that we see that the children are able to restore even in the absence of stimulation. And that's really the key here, which is the neuroplasticity that's being set in the brain and spine is such that the improved function is retained for an extended period of time. And that could last, for a few days initially, for a few hours initially, and extends for potentially several weeks with continued therapy. So it varies from child to child and could be, for a few days, it could be for a few weeks. But what we have seen is that the ability to retain that functionality exists, and you will need to continue to practice those tasks, continue to do your therapy, etc., for you to be able to retain that level of functionality. Where does it taper out? That is still a question. Like I said, our intent with this 8 weeks was really to identify the level of improvement possible. That gives us a sufficient change in the scores that will convince the regulatory bodies that this is a therapy that is safe and effective. Beyond that, the magnitude of change and the maintenance therapy, etc., needed are still open-ended questions that we still need to explore further on.
Okay, that's really helpful information. You mentioned sort of the tapering off piece. I'm wondering, is it the experience that a child will hold on to this function and then all of a sudden they don't have it the next day? Or is it sort of have you seen that it is a slower taper and then eventually you're back to your baseline?
So unfortunately, we have not tracked children post the 8 weeks mark as extensively to really know how much the taper is and when that occurs. Again, if you use a spinal cord injury or stroke model as a surrogate, then it's a gradual taper. It may be different for children with CP. That's something we don't have a good enough handle on at this point. But my guess would be that it would be a more gradual taper. As long as you're able to continue to maintain that level of functionality and activity levels, the taper may be more gradual.
Okay, that's good. That's good information to know. So one of the questions that came through is, does this technology serve most people with CP, or is it intended for a certain level of impairment?
Sure. So our initial pilot studies have really focused in a more exploratory manner, where we have tried to cover as many different forms of CP, both in terms of the types as well as levels. And so far, we've seen a fairly robust response. Again, going back to the GMFM as a biomarker of improvement, with that one metric, we see a consistent response across all forms. Focusing primarily on just the sensory motor function here. Obviously, CP is a complex condition with different forms of challenges, all of which some have metrics to demonstrate improvement, some don't. So all my data here is focused on just the one metric, which is the GMFM 88. So, and that's really what we're reporting back to the FDA. So with that one metric, we know that based on ages as young as about 3 to as old as 16, GMFCS levels 1 through 5, we see a consistent improvement across the board.
That's fantastic. I know one of the videos, I think one of the videos that you were trying to show was a child who was standing on a treadmill and their feet weren't moving, or I've seen this video otherwise, and then they had the skip and they were moving. And again, as a person with CP who had to go through surgery and physical therapy, and you definitely still need physical therapy, this can't be done in isolation. It's honestly moving and a little bit mind-blowing to see the possibility in that. And to imagine also what that child must have felt, because in their mind, they're thinking, I really do want to move. And their body won't do the thing that they want their body to do. And then all of a sudden you give them this non-invasive, not painful technology, and they're able to do something that they haven't been able to do. And whether or not they can articulate that to someone, that's an incredibly powerful thing. And it makes me really excited that our organization is working with yours to help advance this technology for folks. I see something came in to the live Q&A. Someone asked, what is the registration process for your clinical trial?
The one trial that's currently ongoing in the LA area is at capacity. We're not recruiting any additional children for that. We have about 6 children there that are actively receiving therapy with our team. We will be hoping to start the official clinical trial sometime early next year, which will be at multiple sites around the country. And we would be updating our social media posts to share where those clinical sites are and how you can get in touch with them. The easiest way would be to get in touch with us would be through our website or through any of our social media pages, where you can reach out to us and we'll add you to our mailing list. So when the clinical trial is open, you'll receive all the information.
And what I'll do, I'll go ahead and send an email around to everyone who registered for this webinar with that information as well, so that it's easier for them to reach out to you and find out or get whatever information they would like. So we talked a little bit about this, but it's a little bit of a different angle. So someone asked when you are expecting this to be commercially available, and we talked about that earlier. Do you have a specific strategy, and will this only be at specialized clinics, or do you envision it? I guess it depends on the arguments you have and win with insurance companies. Do you envision it just being at clinics, or that it could be something that, you know, a parent of a child could purchase, and eventually if you did adult studies and they bore out good realities, that you could then as an adult purchase something like this?
Yeah, I think the more important way to look at it is how are you actually using it, not how are you purchasing it. So you need to be using this while you're actively doing therapy, actively receiving physical therapy that is appropriate for your child, appropriate for the participant in need. Our strategy here is to initially make this available through the clinic, whether it's purchased by the parent, by the clinician, by the therapist. That's something that still needs to be determined. But the use is going to be in the clinic, in the therapy center, with someone that's experienced, who's an experienced pediatric therapist and is able to work with the child based on their needs and what they require at that stage in terms of therapy. So that's really how I would like to present it as.
I like that reframing, because it's just a reminder that none of this is done in a vacuum, and that there's no one size fits all solution, and there's no one solution. It's that everything really has to work in concert with itself to get someone the best results that they can have. So there's not one magical pill or device. Yeah.
This is not a switch that you flip and everything turns on. It's a process. There's the neuromodulation acts at multiple levels of the brain and spine, and you need to be training while the neuromodulation is actively delivered for you to really see the long-term effect. So that's really how we want to present this as a therapy that would be delivered in clinic with the required staff that has the expertise and the ability to deliver the therapy, and go from there.
It's a really good layered effect. So someone asked if children who've had selective dorsal rhizotomy can benefit from this device, and if so, why, or if not, why not?
We've only done worked with only a couple of children so far that have had rhizotomy surgeries, and studying the effect of skip with them for a very short period of time. So I would say I think the evidence so far has been positive. We don't have enough evidence as much as the earlier pilot studies to have the confidence that this would work. Our intent at this point is to focus on the first indication, which is in children that have not had the rhizotomy surgery. And once that is done, then expand the indication to include children with rhizotomy, assuming that the evidence then holds up that this is also effective in those cases. But yes, that's something that we will be exploring in the future to see if this will work for children with rhizotomy or not, and to what extent at what age, etc. There are various factors that come picture there, in terms of when was surgery done, what levels, how many years post surgery are there. Those are all factors that need to be kept in mind. But that's something that we plan to explore down the road.
Those are some helpful insights, as I know that a lot of children do undergo SDR. Someone else asked, is this device suitable for children with less cognitive awareness? And I know you talked about it having an effect across all GNFCS levels. Is there, does a child need to have a certain level of cognition in order to reap the rewards of it?
Sure. So we've worked with children that have even been non-verbal and have been able to communicate in other ways, be it with sounds or with eye movements, etc. So that is something that we have had a few cases with that we have worked. I think our focus in terms of our clinical trial is identifying a subgroup that are able to follow commands, one or two simple commands, and able to then respond to that. I think the level of cognition and what the threshold lies is still something that needs to be determined. But so far there's been fairly positive responses and evidence that this would work for multiple levels of cognition. But where the threshold is and what that bottom bar is, we don't know yet.
Okay,
I think overall, if I could make a more general statement about where we are, I think we're scratching the surface here in terms of understanding what this does in the CP world. However, the intent is that we know enough in terms of effectiveness that we're able to get to the next stage and hopefully get this through the FDA based on the one metric that we've identified that we know FDA has agreed on already. And once that is through, there's a lot more work to be done in terms of CP as a whole, because like I said, CP, as you all know better than I do, CP is a complex condition and there's too many layers to it that are still unexplored that we don't understand fully. And neuromodulation as such has huge potential in addressing multiple of these unmet needs. So while we focus as a company on the one clinical trial and getting this approved, I think there's a lot more research that still needs to be done on various factors of CP.
Absolutely. I know that a lot of people with CP, the muscles in their digestive system are affected. If there would be, in the future, a way for something like this to relax those muscles or get those muscles to behave in a more typical way and make it easier and safer for people with those issues to eat, that would be wonderful. The ability to even hold your head up is something I think a lot of people take for granted. And I think, I don't know if one of your videos was going to be that, but I've heard that it makes a huge difference in even that. So it's not just a focus on, how you're walking through the world or being able to walk. It is really, being able to hold your head up, which is something that so many people just take for granted. And that would really change a child's life if they were suddenly able to do that.
I agree, and that is yes, one of the videos did show that with the child with level 5 being able to hold her head upright voluntarily, not longer when the stimulation was actively being delivered, and that is one of the parts of one of the training that we do is looking at overall postural, trunk, and head control as part of the training. So yeah, that is a part of the training paradigm that's built in.
Appreciate that. There was one last question. I think you sort of covered it. The maximum age that you've looked at with this technology for CP is 16, right? So someone was asking, they're 21, if that could help them, but that's outside the scope of the age ranges that you've worked with so far, right?
Outside the age range we have worked with so far, correct. But I think 21 technically is still considered pediatric as per FDA standards. But that is outside of the age group that we have worked with so far.
Okay. Well, I really do appreciate you popping in and sharing all this information. And I was going to say that we didn't have more questions, but I do have another question that just came in the Q&A. Someone asked, how does the scone/skip differ from an NMES unit that's already on the market?
Sure. So I think that there's a fundamental difference between NMES and spinal neuromodulation. It's just combining skip and scone. One of the key differences is in the electrical waveforms that we have built in, and that's really our secret sauce is this unique electrical waveform that we've developed that allows us to activate the spine, which are deeper structures, without causing any discomfort to the superficial skin layers. That's one of the key differences in how we approach this as compared to NMES. The other difference is in terms of how we actually then position the electrodes and then deliver the therapy, which makes it unique as compared to other forms of NMES therapies.
Thank you for that. Out of curiosity, understanding that it's not invasive and not a painful experience, how have people described the feeling of the transcutaneous stimulation?
So a lot of times it's a very tingly sensation where it feels like someone's tickling your back or there are ants running along your back at the intensities that we want to be using it at. And that's really the more painful, the painless and the functional intensities. And so it's generally very comfortable. You would only feel it for the first few minutes when the stimulation has been turned on, and after that it ends up being like music in the background. You don't really have a sense of it. It just gets into the routine, and you don't have an active sense of what that stimulation feels like on your back. Very rarely is it pins and needles or any uncomfortable sensation. We avoid going to that high levels of stimulation because that's an area, that's a level of intensity where we know we lose control over the voluntary control that is intended. So we always maintain that intensity such that it's at that submotor threshold, and that's where it's really more of a massaging like effect, where it's a tingly sensation or a ants crawling on your back kind of sensation.
I thank you for that description. When you said it turns almost like into music in the background, that really resonated with me, because I used to talk about my CP that way, that most of the time, this is pre-pandemic, different now, but that most of the time it's background noise to me, and I'm used to it, and it's not really causing me a problem. And then if I woke up with pain one day, or I fell one day, or I tripped a lot one day, then it's like someone turned the volume up and it's not background music anymore. And eventually I have to turn the volume back down. In the last 2.5 years, it's been a bit of a different story, but it's just really interesting to hear you use that framework too, is that's how I would describe my CP experience. And it's helpful to know that, I mean, I knew that this was not a painful technology, but it's still helpful to have the wording to describe it for folks. Did anyone else have questions who's in the audience right now? Okay, well, I just want to say thank you to Parag. You have persevered through a lot of technical difficulties tonight, and I really thank you for your efforts and everything that you're doing, and for the time that you spent with us this evening.